The Washington Post reports that Donald Trump, during his 4-year presidency, lied 30,573 times. Most of us are not that good at lying, but I suspect that we do our fair share. I remember when I was in high school, my parents had a restriction. I was not allowed to see R-rated movies. But my friends really wanted to go see this new movie that was coming out, and it was rated R. So I lied. I told them I was going to see a different movie, and it turned out to be horrible. The movie was terrible. I felt guilt and shame the entire way through. I wasted money on this. It was a mess. The problem is, sometimes we lie and we can profit from it. And yet what we read in the 10 Commandments, number 9 is do not lie. Actually, it says, you shall not speak about your neighbor falsely, with false testimony, that kind of thing. We've been working our way through the book of Exodus, kind of slowed down here at the 10 Commandments, but we're almost done with them. Today we're at number 9, next week number 10. And so today, let's talk about lying. I want to bring up the fact of social media curating this image about ourselves. Does your social media tell the truth about you? Or do you ever feel tempted to lie? To maybe make it look like your life is far more joyful than it really is? If our social media accounts told the truth, we'd be happy nearly all the time, wouldn't we? As if we have these amazing experiences nonstop. At best, that's a half-truth. But in reality, our social media is often just a bald-faced lie. And when we lie, what we're saying about ourselves and others and God is really intense. First of all, we're saying that we don't like the truth about ourselves, or at least part of the truth. And we're also saying that we can't trust others with that truth about ourselves. The reality is we might be afraid to trust them. Finally, we're saying that we do not fully appreciate who or how God made us. We can't trust Him to care for us. So what do? We take matters into our own hands and we lie. Now, no doubt there are plenty of times when we make mistakes. Sometimes they're intentional. Often they're not intentional, and yet we still want to hide those mistakes. We become embarrassed when we feel that our flaws are out there for the world to see, whether it's just inadequacies, incapabilities, or just plain old accidents. So we want to hide them. We weigh the options in the balance. On the one hand, if we tell the truth, we're going to have to face the consequences for that mistake we just made. If we lie, we could avoid those consequences. We generally have a strong human desire to avoid consequences, and so we lie. Sometimes we get away with it. Sometimes we cultivate a whole persona that is a lie. The Encyclopedia of Biblical and Christian Ethics says this: lying is the intent to proclaim something known to be false. It also says, by contrast, that lying is not, or what it is not. In assessing truthfulness, the majority of people employ what is known to philosophers and ethicists as the correspondence theory of truth. Statements are thus regarded as true if they match in detail the manner in which the events described actually occurred. So lying is duplicity. It's the act of deception. Lying can cross into equivocation as well when a person is not presenting one way or the other. They're equivocating. And when we do that, if a person does that enough, they are considered to be a liar. Then there's exaggeration. Are we lying when we exaggerate? What about something seemingly minor, like the practice of rounding up numbers? We pastors, admittedly, really guilty of this. When we talk about how many people are a part of our church family or how many people come to worship service, that's so often the first question we get when we're meeting people and they find out, oh, you're a pastor. So we can be very unhealthily concerned about appearing as though our church is growing. So when asked, we'll just exaggerate. We'll round up. Say, like my church, about 75 people are there on average. We'll think to ourselves, 80. We'll just tell them 80. Is that so wrong? Inwardly, we rationalize. I mean, there's hardly any difference between 75 and 80, right? And many times, 80 actually do show up, we think. And then we say, people round up all the time. They're probably assuming that we're rounding up. Sounds a lot like deception to me. Followers of Jesus, instead, should practice such passionate commitment to truth that we might actually appear radical in our culture. We should be avoiding exaggeration at all costs. Now, having said that, we also want to avoid being tedious. What I mean is this. Have you ever been in a conversation where someone says this? Yeah, last Tuesday I went to the store. Wait, was it Wednesday? No, it was Wednesday. I'm sorry. Last Wednesday when I went to the store, actually, you know what? It was Tuesday. It was Tuesday. I know it because on Wednesday we visited my parents, and on Tuesday I had to pick up my daughter from school because she had her dentist appointment, and then we went to the store. Now, my guess is you've been in a conversation like that where someone can go on and on trying to figure out about a specific detail. Maybe you even did that in your own conversation from time to time. We can get really precise in communicating those details and stories, can't we? And maybe it's because we don't want to lie. We want to tell the truth. And that's great. But that entire conversation I just acted out, it's unnecessary. Not a single word of it matters. It's all extra detail. And sometimes if you're listening to someone doing that, you're trying to keep a straight face and following along with them. But inwardly, what are you thinking? Just get on with it, please. So we're not lying if we inadvertently change a detail and we got it wrong. We don't need to go back and fix it when that detail doesn't matter. What's more, sometimes our memories are wrong. Just plain old wrong. In his podcast, Revisionist History, Malcolm Gladwell tells the story of the firing of NBC News anchor Brian Williams. Williams, years before, was on air, and he was telling the story about how he was reporting along with a military unit in the Middle East. And he said that he got right in the middle of a firefight. Well, some of the soldiers heard it. They did not remember it that way. They found out the details, and they told NBC that Williams was wrong. He was wrong, actually. He wasn't there in a firefight. NBC felt like Williams was purposefully falsifying his reporting to make himself look better, and they fired him. Because in reporting, we need to tell the truth, especially in a world of fake news. Well, Malcolm Gladwell explained that researchers, in the days just after the attacks of September 11th, 2001, they asked people to record their memories. They wanted to get it when it was really fresh in their minds. Questions like, where were you when you first found out? And the people then would tell their stories. Then a few years went by, or maybe it was just 1 year. My memory is also a little weak here. The researchers went back to the same people and asked them the questions over again. Where were you when you found out about 9/11? And the people then recorded their answers. Then the researchers played the people the recordings from the original interviews. So often what they said was different. And the people are watching themselves on screen, and here they are dumbstruck because they cannot believe that there they are answering what they now believe is something different. It was clear scientific evidence that our memories are not always trustworthy. In that particular scenario, clearly it was the person on screen who was answering the question in the days right after 9/11 that had the most authoritative memory. It was just happening. And so it's a reality to us that we need to be humble about our ability to remember rightly. We need to be gracious to people in their memory as well. And so let us be committed to truth. Yes, humble. Yes, gracious. Committed to truth, where we do want to include exaggeration or white lies, even if it means we'll face the consequences. It's a great story that Corrie ten Boom, author of The Hiding Place, tells about her sister. During the Nazi era of World War II, her family was hiding Jewish people in their home. And eventually, German officers came knocking on the door, looking. They suspected. And her sister was radically committed to the truth. And she told the Nazi officers they were right under the table where they were just sitting there. And the Nazi officers were like, "Are you serious? You would hide them in such an easy place that we could easily look at?" And they weren't under the table, like lifting up the tablecloth. They couldn't see anything. But the reality was they were under the table. There was a trap door under the table, and that was where their secret room was. She told the truth. She gave them a clue that they could have easily followed and found the hidden Jews, and that would have meant imprisonment and perhaps death for her whole family. It's difficult. There are times when we may be tempted to lie. There are times when it might even seem in Scripture like people are encouraged to lie. The Hebrew midwives are an example that we talked about earlier in our Exodus series. God never condones lying. And so what can it look like for us to practice a radical commitment to truth? Have you curated a persona or a lie that you've been living with? What can it look like to let it go? What can it look like to open up to the truth?